Salams from the People's Dispatch studios here in New Delhi. I'm Siddhantani and you're watching Daily Debrief. On the show today, we're talking about monkeypox, another deadly raid in the occupied West Bank, and racism in Scottish cricket. First up, over the weekend, the World Health Organization has labelled the outbreak and rapid spread of the monkeypox virus as a global health emergency. Over 16,000 cases have been reported already this year in over 75 countries and territories around the world, and at least 5 patients have died from the virus in Africa. I spoke earlier via video conference to Anna Vrachar, who covers public health for us. Anna, good to see you. Although we're not talking about much good news today, the WHO, like we mentioned earlier, declaring a global emergency around the monkeypox virus. What is the latest? What's the update? What do we know as of now?
Well, essentially, the WHO declared a public health emergency of international concern just this Saturday, so on the 23rd of July. And what this is, it's meant as a warning primarily to governments. And what the WHO is saying essentially is that the monkeypox outbreak should be taken seriously, and that governments around the world, they should now scale up their activities of prevention, of response, of treatment, and get prepared if this escalates. So one thing to point out is that this is not the same thing as a pandemic declaration. So a public health emergency instead should be seen something like a step before the pandemic. So ideally, if the public health emergency is declared, we still do have some time to prepare, to evaluate what we need, if there are stocks, where the stocks are, how we can make sure that those are accessible to everyone, and so on and so on. So, in theory, a public health emergency is like an alarm bell. So the WHO sounds the alarm bell and the world gets prepared. So what we know from previous experiences is that in practice, it's unfortunately not so much. So it still depends a lot on how the governments themselves will behave after this announcement. So we have seen that, although the WHO made the declaration in the case of COVID-19 as well, there was still some time and some reluctance for governments to actually take the recommendation seriously and to start acting up. So it's still to be seen what's going to happen here. And of course, it's worth mentioning that now that we do have an announcement of a public health emergency, it doesn't mean that we get more money going into monkeypox response. So that's something to consider as well. On the other hand, why the WHO recommendations are important, beside doing some general stuff like inviting all countries to get prepared, to scale up their response and capacities. This set of recommendations was interesting also because DG Tedros invited the countries that hold manufacturing capacities for smallpox or monkeypox vaccines to get ready to contribute to the global effort. So that's something that should be, considered in the weeks to come, and keeping an eye out to see how it develops. There's just one final thing I think that's interesting to point out when we're talking about the public health emergency announcement. It's that it was for the first time since this system was put in place that the DG took a decision independently of what a technical advisory committee advised him to do. So the committee was split, and the committee was saying, we're not sure if this should be a public health emergency or not. And then DG Tedros comes in and says, okay, but based on what has been happening before, and based on what we're seeing likely to happen in the future, I do consider this is an emergency, and that we should take steps to act on it.
Right. And are there any specific sort of guidelines or recommendations that governments need to or that they have suggested that governments start putting into place to at least sort of reduce the spread or the rate at which the spread is happening?
Let's maybe start by saying that, the latest numbers that the WHO came forward with on Saturday was that it was about 16,000 people infected with monkeypox in over 75 countries and territories. and why this is so important and why they have actually taken up the possibility of declaring a public health emergency is that it differs very much from how this virus used to act before. So, it's spreading in different places very quickly outside the regions where it usually used to appear. So the ways in which it spreads, it's a bit different from what it usually spreads in. And so basically health systems and the WHO are still catching up with what's going on here. It's not completely so straightforward. And then there are, of course, different categories of risks that have been announced by the WHO when the official declaration was made. And apart from the European region, where the risk is considered high, still there's moderate risk announced for other regions. So that's that's also something that's worth watching out for and see if it changes in the near future. So basically, the WHO recommends about 3 vaccines that are used for smallpox for use against monkeypox, with the caveat that the WHO says, we didn't actually try those vaccines in a situation like this. So our best guess is they could help, but we're still to see in practice. And then the issue with those is that there's about I believe 116 million or so doses overall. A lot of those doses are concentrated in some national stockpiles, right, most particularly in the US. So, it still depends on how countries that hold the smallpox vaccines doses will act and will react to basically how they will approach sharing that WHO is encouraging.
Thanks very much for that update, Anna. And of course, we'll ask you to keep tracking that story for us. At least 2 Palestinians were killed by Israeli police and special forces during overnight operations in the occupied West Bank. Palestinian news agency Wafa reported that these Israeli forces stormed Al Yasmina neighborhood in the old city of Nablus after midnight and cordoned off a house before embarking on a bombing operation on the house with explosives and gunfire, which ended in the killing of 2 Palestinians. Immediately thereafter, protests broke out and at least 12 others were wounded, including 1 in serious condition. This is according to reports by the Palestinian Red Crescent. Abdul Rahman joins me now for more on this story. Abdul, what are you hearing about these latest raids in the occupied West Bank?
Yesterday night, the Israeli forces, as it is their regular routine, they raided a village in Nablus in the middle of the night, and in which, after the raid started happening, there was, of course, a firing from both the sides, which led to a large-scale protest demonstration, a spontaneous protest demonstration, which further complicated the situation in which more than a dozen people, Palestinians, were wounded. So this is, we can only say this is a pattern which has been followed by the Israeli security forces, particularly since the beginning of this year in particular, when they raid the villages in the night, the camps in the night, and they take out individuals they claim responsible for certain quote-unquote terrorist acts in different parts of Israel in the occupied territories. So yesterday's raid on Nablus is very similar to what happened earlier in the previous months in Jenin, in other parts of the occupied West Bank. So this was just sadly, unfortunately, a routine Israeli raid, a raid by the occupiers.
Yeah. In some of the language that we are reading, Abdul, in which the Prime Minister has addressed his cabinet, extremely violent language, talking of entering the homes of Palestinians and harming them before, Israeli citizens could be harmed. And that sort of, and the toll this year is over 60 according to official accounts. What is the sort of, is there any wider sort of context in which this increase in violence is happening, or is it just business as usual like you were mentioning?
Of course, there is a context. There is always a context, one or the other, given the logic with which a particular political establishment in Israel operates. So we know that there is an election coming in October and November in Israel, the fifth election in less than 3 years. And there is a very tough competition between the one right wing and the other. And they have to prove that we are more right than the other. And one of the ways through which they prove themselves to be true Zionist and true quote unquote right, possessing the right ideology, quote unquote, the right wing ideology in Israel, is to increase their aggression against Palestinians. The aggression is everyday occurrence, that is a fact, but it increases, the volume of it increases whenever there is a kind of need of the political establishment to prove their Zionist credentials. As we all know, the Yair Lapid is considered to be relatively moderate than what he succeeded, the person he succeeded, Bennett, who even denied Palestinian nationalism and said that there is no separate two-state. Yair Lapid theoretically believes in two-state solution. But even he has to win the election, and he knows that his rival is Benjamin Netanyahu, and he can only prove he is better than Benjamin Netanyahu while kind of intensifying the oppression of Palestinians in the occupied territories. And I think we should see the increasing, you were saying 60 plus Palestinians have died, including some of the well-known journalists, and without any repercussion. So there is a complete impunity. They know all of this. And in that, Palestinian life becomes a kind of way to ensure of ensuring their political victory within Israel. So this is the logic of occupation, and the larger context is, of course, occupation.
Thanks, Abdul. And finally, the governance and leadership practices of Cricket Scotland have been found to be institutionally racist. The organisation leading the independent review of the governing body has said on Monday. The study confirmed that there were 448 examples that demonstrated institutional racism, with over 60% of the survey's respondents saying they had either experienced, seen, or had reported to them incidents of either racism, inequality, or discrimination. The review was commissioned by Sport Scotland, which is the overall governing body for all sport in the country, and executed by Plan for Sport. NewsClick Sports editor Leslie Xavier joins me now for more on this story. So, Leslie, this review, of course, was prompted by allegations made by two Scotland cricketers, Majid Haq and Qasim Sheikh. And now it has come out, the report has finally come out, and sort of vindicated their allegations, verified that, in fact, the governance of cricket in Scotland is quite deeply and institutionally racist. What are the highlights from this report?
The report, the exact fine details is again not out yet, but the broad picture we have gotten from what has come out in the media. So the study was conducted, an independent study was made, and it had 448 indicators of institutional racism in it. The report has come out with this 448 damning indicators, and out of which they set certain parameters to conduct the study, interviewing people, interviewing instances which led to, hate crimes, which also led to police cases as well. Some of them are casual instances of racism in the dressing room or within clubs, certain clubs. So out of the 31 test parameters that they conducted during the study, Scottish Cricket Board failed on 29 and narrowly made it in the two other markers. So it's the amount of racism that's entrenched in the system across various layers is huge, and so that's the biggest damning understanding that has come out from this. That the game is completely, let's just say the game is completely racist, and it's not an happy space for black-skinned or brown-skinned players to flourish. And that's why the two players who are involved, who have come out and said that their careers, and you are talking about someone like Majid Ak, who is the top wicket taker for Scotland. So, but he has come out saying that his career was completely blighted by institutional racism. And institutional racism is it's not the first time that in cricket we have seen this happen. So a few months back we saw Yorkshire, the club, being penalized for institutional racism within the club, and rightfully England and Wales cricket board came down hard on them. In South Africa, there has been an independent social justice study that has been conducted. A report is out. Its implications are being analyzed by a parliamentary committee there, and they're trying to figure out how to eradicate institutional racism within South Africa. And this, we are talking about a country which has come out of the apartheid era. They instituted quota system for assimilating black players, representation of black players into black and brown players into the system. And then even within that, we have had top performers like Mackay Antony, for instance, who has come out open repeatedly saying how alone he was in the dressing room. And we are talking about 20th century. And this is something that you have pointed out previously when we have spoken about racism, that why do you always say 20th century? Because these things, some things never change. It has been continuously ongoing. And sport is trying to make a course correction in this matter. And right now, when players come out and allege institutional racism, serious studies are being made how to eradicate it. And that's why it's commendable that Cricket Scotland, the entire board resigned, taking responsibility for the incidents, and also putting their faith in the Scottish sporting system, Sports Scotland, to set the precedents right, to analyze the studies in the report, figure out means to eradicate the problems that is there in the system, and reconvene the board in such a way that such things can be avoided in the future. So that's the right steps to take. That's the right way to go forward looking at it. And in that sense, it is commendable. But then the reality, the specter of institutional racism is there right across sport. Cricket, it's coming out now. But
perhaps it's coming out now in cricket because South Asian cricketers are more prominent in at least some of these countries, as opposed to sports like football, where the brown kids are almost always the last to get even selected. So therefore, they have even less of a platform to even make these allegations or come out and say that, this is how we are institutionally treated by the system.
But I agree to that part, especially in cricket. But at the same time, when you look at a major sport like football, where black players are the stars and highly sought after professionals in the playing field, on the playing field as players. But when you look at the administrative side of football clubs, the top football clubs across leagues, across Europe, across the world, how many black coaches are there? How many black administrators are there? How many black presidents are there of clubs? And so it's not like we have had like 5, 6, 7 generations of great black players coming out of Africa and making a name for themselves in Europe. Where are they now? Of course, they made their money, they made their careers, they made their mark. But the structure of football, or for that matter, sport administration in general, is so biased towards certain race. I mean, it's almost as if there's no way that these people could make it up the ladder, corporate ladder, if I can call it a corporate ladder.
So where does Scotland go now from here?
So there would be, like I said, there would be a full-on interest going on, understanding the problem, where the problem lies, and then structural changes is what we are expecting, what the experts are also saying. So Sports Scotland will take over. It's on par with any of the national sporting bodies that is. So they are the blanket organization which controls the national federations and their functioning. So now that the board has completely resigned en masse, and now the faith has been put on Sports Scotland to set things right. So there will be a huge overhaul of the system. Maybe there will be systems put in place so that such instances, if it happens, there is stop and check being done and actions taken immediately so that it doesn't escalate into a larger problem, larger institutional problem. That's what the key is over here. The key is to eradicate racism institutionally so that the players, when they face it, they have somewhere to go to clear things. So that is what the structural change that we will see in the coming months will be based on that. And we all know that Scottish cricket board is not exactly the richest or the biggest cricket board in the world, but the impact of such allegations cuts across. I mean, regardless of their standing in the sport, regardless of the money or the stature, it cuts across sport and bring the sport into disrepute, bring the larger idea of sport across the various games into disrepute as well. So in that way, responsibility squarely falls on Scotland to set the precedent here, and then, I mean, hopefully, other sports, other countries
then learn from it.
Learn from it and make amends. That's the need of the hour in any case.
Yeah. All right. Thanks very much, Leslie, for tracking that story for us. That's all we have on this episode of Daily Debrief from Leslie, myself, and the entire People's Dispatch team. Thank you very much for watching. As always, for more details on these stories, you can head over to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and give us a follow on the social media platform of your choice for regular updates. We'll be back again tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.